Hello and welcome to the final episode of Teppou Republic. On the last episode we saw Takayuki moving up to engage the Yonezawa who had invaded near Ugo, but in the end he decided to actually avoid battle, not wishing to have an unnecessary engagement. Tananao pressed north into the remaining shogunate territory, landing troops on a relatively undefended stretch of coast ready to begin his attack. In the west, Takayuki attacked the castle at Bitchu using his massive artillery advantage to completely destroy all of the imperial defenders, utilizing the rapidly firing Armstrong guns to make life even easier. Back in Hokkaido Island, the Yonezawa forces brought in a reinforcement army, and Tananao decided to attack them before they could move to join their comrades over at the stronghold. The battle was relatively easy because the fleet that brought Tananao in was able to provide supporting fire, severely disrupting the enemy's formations and inflicting severe casualties, so the battle was won before it began. Then Yoshiuji boarded ships of his own to come over and help Tananao out. Tananao had started besieging the castle, some of the ships stayed behind to provide supporting fire, the rest ferrying reinforcements in. Back over in the west, Kunimitsu started a siege of Izumo province. The enemy's defensive army was stronger than him, so he's going to try and siege them out to prompt a field battle where things might be more even. In Bitchu, various enemy forces invaded the province. Takayuki moved out to try and destroy them, but it turned out the enemy was so weak we could just auto-resolve them out of existence, so their little counter-invasion failed. On Shikoku Island, we landed the first Sioux forces in Awa as part of a plan to start pushing in to capture this province as a foothold to the island as a whole. Finally, an Iwakuni army moved from the west into Takayuki's ambush position on the edge of Bitchu, so now we're going to see him trying to take them down rapidly. People still talk about the revolution like it is happening. It was over long ago. Now that the insanity of the excitement has passed, the process of actually rebuilding the nation can begin without ideological distractions. A few amendments to our current direction will be all we need to see something great come of all this. I really believe it. For example, this undue focus on servicing the lower orders with state resources is quite ludicrous. Scrapping that will free up vast wealth for further ventures abroad. Once we establish a clear military advantage in Asia, we shall enjoy all manner of diplomatic and economic niceties that the Todo would have wasted long before then. I write to you in the foreknowledge that the majority of your esteemed selves already see the truth in this approach. My main purpose is to urge you to take affirmative action in any and all Kokai hearings on such topics, and to rest assured that you are in good company. In doing so, you will make sure that your families continue to have a clear influence on the future of unlimited potential we can now forge for this reborn nation. I will also inform those who do not know that there are many chances to meet and discuss these policies outside of the formal channels. I can't say any more so openly, but if you come to me personally, I will be happy to connect you with the circles you need to meet. You will see the Kokai in a whole new light once you take part in a private session, I assure you. Good luck in your endeavours, and I plead that you maintain your ancient family's honour in all that you do. We begin with that ambush of the Iwakuni forces, who are immediately being slaughtered by Takayuki's close quarters engagement with his riflemen. I'm even taking friendly fire because my lines are too close together, firing crossways at the enemy's formation and hitting myself with the shots that miss. The enemy formation itself though is being absolutely torn apart by shrapnel and mortar rounds, and the survivors are being gunned down by rapid fire from both sides of their formation. Overall, the Iwakuni are in complete trouble. Tons of the units rout immediately, and now you can see the battle is already over. The balance bar fully in our favour after just a few seconds of engagement. The survivors attempt to escape, are bombarded further with artillery, and then a decisive victory is declared. That was very quick. We've immediately dealt with that Iwakuni invasion with a very satisfying ambush. The formation was a bad one in terms of friendly fire, but very effective in terms of the casualties it inflicts on the enemy, so a very berserk formation. So let's head back to the strategy map and check the results there. You can see we lost over 100 troops, most of which were due to friendly fire. But the enemy lost over 2,000 men, 1,000 of which were killed in the battle, the other 1,000 slaughtered in the ensuing rout. You can see it was the Parrot guns firing shrapnel shot into the enemy's formation that led the kill table there, so that invasion is dealt with very easy. Now right after that, a danger I'd identified in the previous episode comes to fruition. The Swan-Nose rifle attendants hanging about here in Izumo province attack the artillery that I left behind. That artillery can't escape battle, so now it faces the advance of the enemy's troops. The balance bar doesn't look good, but I thought this would be an interesting duel. 2 squads of howitzers against 2 squads of high to medium tier rifle infantry. I definitely think I can do better than the auto-resolve will do, so let's do this one myself. Now I attempted it several times and it kept crashing, so I was running out of time, so I had to film it live rather than in the battle replay, so we're going to have the cards at the bottom, but we should still get the same effect. So you can see I've deployed with 1 unit in the middle and 1 unit in the corner. This sort of crossways formation allows them to support each other. If one gun comes under close attack by the enemy, the other gun can still fire on the enemy's position at danger close range. But before any of that, the enemy are right on the other side of the field, and I'm going to try and exceed the operational range of these guns by just firing into the sky and letting the shots fall down in the general vicinity of the enemy. That's a very non-exact science, but after a bunch of testing shots, we eventually get a sort of idea of where to fire and start actually having a chance of hitting the enemy. Probably during the enemy's advance, we got, I don't know, perhaps 5 or 6 hits on the enemy that would have done a couple of casualties each, because the howitzer's shells are not very powerful. Eventually they will come into actual firing range of the gun, so I don't have to do this anymore and all of the guns will fire. I was doing this only fires 1 shell at a time, so it's terribly inefficient, but it scores a few extra kills that we shouldn't have got otherwise, so that's good. So here the enemy now actually come into range, and I'm switching over to shrapnel shot, because with shrapnel you're guaranteed to get a few kills, even firing at the maximum range, because the spread of the shot is so large. So you can see we do manage to slaughter a few enemies. The enemy there even going down to wavering at this point, but their morale will improve because they're not going to take casualties very quickly for the rest of their advance once my shrapnel is used up, especially because the howitzers have a tendency of firing over the top of the enemy, where the shots just explode and try to kill the enemy with pieces of the shell, but it very rarely actually gets a kill in my experience anyway. So you can see now later on the enemy have marched really close to one of my units of guns, and I've taken a few casualties on the way. You can see their lines are a little bit thinner than they were just now. Curiously, they've already come into their own firing range. They're not firing at my guns, so it seems the enemy have decided they are just going to march right onto the guns. They're even going to walk, not even run at them. They're just going to walk up to the guns and attempt to defeat me in melee or at very close range. So while they were doing this, I thought I might be able to do better than the AI by firing at them manually. It didn't go all that well actually, the guns are still inaccurate at really close range. But anyway, the enemy do indeed rush into melee at the last second, so now I can bombard them at point blank range with the gun and deal a few extra casualties here as my crew struggle to fight them off. The enemy's melee stats are higher than mine, so they're going to do better, and of course they have a giant numerical advantage. So very quickly, the enemy drive me away. I got a couple of shots off there, dealing a couple of extra casualties. So that's something at least, and the other upside of that whole charge is that now that they're stuck in the corner here, they'll have to walk another distance, approaching my second set of guns, giving me a chance to hit them some more. My shrapnel shot recharged, I fired at them, and then a critical moment happened. One of the 2 rifle squads shattered, leaving the battlefield, effectively halving the enemy's strength there. The other squad seems to be somewhat shocked by that and just stands there, taking more shots, but then they continue their advance. They're going to do exactly the same thing, just walk right up to the guns. Once they get close, they break into a run. They're charging into melee, no gunshots here. So once again, I've got a chance to just keep firing super close and attempt to take out the enemy. The balance bar is actually even at this point, as you can see, so it seems I still have a chance. I can keep firing, blasting away enemies who happen to be standing in front of the gun, whilst my crew actually do a pretty good job of taking on the enemy. My crew probably killed a good number of them, but themselves were outnumbered, and not all of them fight because some of them sit with the guns and with the horses. So although on paper we probably had about equal numbers to the enemy probably got us pretty surrounded and 2 to 1 outnumbered. So you can see the gun is still miraculously firing. It's being reloaded by the guy who's hiding behind it on the right, and then the enemy on the left seems to be distracting things. He comes off the gun, but by some miracle, the gun continues to fire, it continues to reload even with its crew now gone or dead, fighting for their lives somewhere in the melee. The gun managed to keep firing, but that unit eventually routs. And unfortunately, we lost that battle. It was a very close one. We took the enemy really far down in terms of numbers, defeating 2/3 of both of their regiments, I think. A close defeat for the Sioux forces. We tried, and it was a valiant fight, but we just couldn't quite beat those odds. I don't know. We all saw it, but no one knows what it was. The guns just kept firing on their own, while the crew fought with the strength of demons. They kept shouting something about the spirit of the revolution. Is that what possesses them and brings them victory? It can't be, because that would mean the will of the heavens is on their side, not the Imperial Majesties. It must be some dark creature, cast out from the heavens perhaps. But then why does heaven not send such spirits to aid our cause as well? I don't understand anything. What is the secret to these Sioux warriors? You can see on the results screen we defeated about 2/3 of the enemy's entire force there, losing all of our own of course, but that Swano army has been so weakened it's probably not really going to cause any more trouble after that, so in some sense the sacrifice will have been worth it. So it's time to move on. The Hiroshima withdraw some of their weakened forces from the border between Bingo and Bitchu there, so that'll be useful for Takayuki later. Then the Yonezawa main force in Ugo moves into Takemichi's ambush zone. This time Takemichi can no longer make excuses to get out of his orders. It's finally time for him to actually engage this army, whether that's actually necessary for the progression of the war or not. The enemy has a cavalry and melee heavy army, a dangerous force to ambush. We don't want to deploy too close to their starting position. Seeing the battlefield reinforced my plan to not deploy too close to the enemy. In fact, I did the opposite. I deployed as far away as possible in the corner of the map, turning this into a regular battle. This forested mountain, fighting uphill where the enemy have good cover and tons of chances to charge out and hit me, wasn't the ideal place for an ambush. So it seems that Takemichi made a bit of a poor choice in choosing this for the ambush site. But anyway, the enemy's force forms up on the other side of the map. I thought they might just stand there, but eventually they resolve to cross through the mountain and come towards my position. Ideal, because I've got a really nice defensive position there. On the way I'm going to try and hit them with artillery. The enemy of course have the forest for cover, but when they stop in open clearings now and again, we get a few good shots on the enemy. And here their subordinate general is almost killed by a very close artillery shot that kills the men next to him. None of the rest of the unit even flinch seeing that close shot. I guess they're just hardcore. So the enemy will now advance through the remains of the forest, not taking all that much damage to the artillery until they come into the open. The first thing they did when they reached the edge of the tree line was to send their cavalry out to do 2 flank attacks. Both sides had 2 squads of Yariki that started wheeling around, doing a really wide approach towards the edges of my line, while the rest of their army remains hidden here in the center, presumably just in front of this general who begins his advance now. Those cavalry are dangerous because this army is stretched quite thin. A charge would absolutely decimate one of my lines if it hit them from the front. I do though have plenty of spearmen so I can prepare for them. They're also, as you can see here, taking a few pot shots from the line itself as they approach. So they're coming in at a complete flank, but of course because I'm right next to the line in a cheaty sort of way, they can't rear attack me, forcing them to attack the flanks where I've got these echelons of spearmen already prepared to receive them. But will that do any good? Because here you can see I set up my Yari attendants, thinking I'll stop the charge of the 2 enemy units. The enemy just charged right past me as if I'm not there, slamming into my infantry and starting to do damage, both to the front line and the sharpshooter line beyond. On the other side, the same thing happens, but this time, a squad of ninja, which were on fire at will, decide to throw grenades into the melee, killing tons of my own men. Really annoying. I definitely should have paid more attention there. Plus my men are in trouble fighting with the enemy's cav. I've got my spearmen in there as well, but of course these Yari attendants aren't actually that good as an anti-cavalry unit, so my line infantry here have taken severe damage, but the enemy's cavalry are going to be worn down in this engagement because they're too far in front of their supporting infantry to make a massive difference. This enemy general squad tries to run in as well and is absolutely cut down in a volley of fire from an unengaged line infantry unit. Some of the enemy's ranged units are now coming into position to begin their line battling. These archers going to pepper the center of my line as the enemy's melee troops advance. I'm firing back here on the right as the cavalry have just about been contained, with the Yari Kachi coming in from further down the line to actually defeat them where the Yari attendants were failing. So my men now brace themselves for the enemy's charge, trying to kill them, hoping to live through what's probably the final engagement for them in this war. Second rank, reload. First rank. Come on, first rank. First rank, fire. First rank, reload. No, too late. First rank, present bayonets. Looks like we aren't going to get off so easy this time. Sorry, boys. Shift over. Shift over, I said. I ain't standing at the damn back now. About time I saw how you boys do up close. Always wanted to fight a samurai anyway. I'll do my old dad proud today. Alright, first rank. Let's make sure this wasn't all for nothing. Show them the strength of the Owari 32nd. Advance! The enemy's high-quality melee infantry are going to charge up the hill to try and reach my line. My guys are frantically gunning them down. You can see these Shogutai take extreme casualties at the last second. A point-blank double volley decimates their numbers, but the survivors press on, thus rampaging through my line, who of course are vastly inferior to them in hand-to-hand combat. Nearby enemy samurai have got engaged with my own samurai, not so bad. Another unchecked cavalry unit is slaughtering its way through my centre, and this time the enemy are correctly using the chaos to their advantage, pushing in infantry behind the cavalry to effectively lock down and destroy my line infantry there, who at the moment don't have any support. All of my melee infantry are already busy in other places. Overall, it's one of the most successful melee attacks we've seen from an enemy army so far, doing a lot of damage to my line, but eventually my guys were freed up from fighting the enemy's cavalry, and I was able to start coming to help my surviving line infantrymen. Here in the centre, the enemy's cavalry too were gradually defeated fighting with line infantry. They routed. It looked like they were coming to actually attack my guns here, but they rout just before they get the chance to fight. The guns themselves firing right through the enemy, killing one of their horsemen with an artillery shell, which goes off hopefully to kill more enemy infantry in the background. Here the enemy samurai are finally being defeated by my own samurai. My line infantry is still there in the battle. Luckily it doesn't go on for too long. The enemy start to retreat. You can see at this point the balance bar has shifted very heavily in my favour, because although the enemy are doing a lot of damage to me, they've lost all of their men in the process. It was very much a suicide attack. Their surviving ranged units are being gunned down by all of my line infantry units who aren't engaged by the enemy's melee infantry. So now all that was left for the battle was to defeat some wooden cannons at the back. For this I decided to send Takayuki himself on horseback to deal with it. It will be him and his guards who deal the final blow in Takayuki's war, riding through the forest here using the first person camera, sped up there of course, to approach the enemy's wooden cannons. They did manage to kill one of the guards, but overall it was a successful charge. You can see this guy at least tries to hit the enemy with revolvers, misses completely, but the enemy rout as the horsemen approach, so the battle is over without having to have a brawl over the cannons themselves, although by routing they are sealing their fate because the horsemen can just ride them down. So Takayuki has won a decisive victory in his final battle. It was one of the bloodiest battles we've seen, probably Takayuki's most difficult battle there, but at least it was decisive. We've completely destroyed the Yonezawa army. The threat to our internal domain is now completely removed as a result of this battle. You can see though lots of regiments have taken damage in that fight. A decent amount of casualties, the enemy taking far more as ever, so it wasn't exactly a disaster in terms of casualty numbers. Now the Yonezawa challenge Tananao to battle over at the siege. The balance bar is about even, but you can see their infantry is a mixed bag, and ours has much more experience and upgrades, plus we have artillery advantage. So overall, I'm not expecting this fight to be hard, even though the balance bar claims it's even, especially because we're going to have naval support fire, making life even easier for us. As the battle begins, I can take up this really nice defensive position on a really big sloping hill, allowing me to set up multiple lines of fire with the artillery on top with a clear view of the battlefield. At the bottom of the hill is a dried up riverbed, a perfect place to slaughter the enemy as they attempt to set up their own lines, because the enemy do have a lot of ranged units this time, so they're probably going to attempt a line battle. To begin with, the enemy's army just stood around on the other side of the map. It was forming up, and I believe waiting for its reinforcements to come in. The reinforcements was just a single unit of horsemen. I believe it's the Yonezawa daimyo coming to join the army for what could be the Yonezawa's final battle here, but as they wait, they're taking artillery fire and shrapnel shot, weakening them before the battle even starts, which is a bad start since they need a big advantage to push up that hill towards me. You can see the general there in the background, slowly riding over, the enemy just wasting time. They probably should have started further back or advanced straight away. But perhaps these Yonezawa men don't have that much experience of modern warfare, especially because from the looks of their general, they don't have much development level. They're still using samurai to guard their officers. So finally the enemy's army does advance and it rushes right up to that riverbed where they are going to start setting up a line battling formation, as I said. The signal flare from the naval artillery lands right in front of them, but they continue to make their advance, so our fire is going to come down right into the middle of the enemy's formation very soon and do a lot of damage. The enemy begin their attack, but of course they have a fundamental disadvantage both in numbers, position, equipment and training, so overall there's really no way they can win this by just trying to shoot up the hill towards me. So as their units start to scatter now as they hear the artillery inbound, but for most of them it's too late. The artillery starts to smash their lines. Here their general tries to snake through the zone the artillery is falling into and loses half of his men as a result with 2 direct hits. The enemy's messy formation, whilst rushing around, is still taking fire from the entirety of my line. Overall, this chaos is really destroying the enemy, and a lot of the enemy's regiments start to fall back at this point, especially the lower morale ones. The enemy's general has come to the front of their formation and decides he's going to attempt to get up the hill himself, but quickly learns that's not how it works. A few volleys of gunfire kill most of his men and he tries to get out of there. So at this point, I think you can tell this battle is going to very easily go in our favour. Just a few other fighting regiments to gun down with our massive missile advantage. The enemy start making their retreat. Tana now pursues them mercilessly, using pursuit by fire with shrapnel shot to cut down the enemy as they attempt to escape. The battle is still going on because again they had a squad of wooden cannons sitting at the back, but luckily I had some Yariki this time who could just rush over there and take them out very easily. So with that, the battle was over. A decisive victory for Tana now, an easy one and one that was quite easy to predict given the advantages that his army had over the Yonezawa force, but it was really a last-ditch attempt by the Yonezawa, and now that they failed, they pretty much sealed their fate, and Tana now is probably going to go on to capture a good amount of Hokkaido as a result of overcoming this final hurdle. Life is full of things that rest out of grasp. In death, the only thing you need is simply a thrust of the blade away. Death is the relief for those who cannot make the world bend to their will, cannot find a path that leads to their goal, and cannot persuade fate to make one. Each man who died to the Sioux knew that their death brought an end to a struggle that was impossible to win. That they fought anyway was a sign that the way of honor and duty still sparks in the ashes of the nation the rebels have burned. And now, I go to them as their leader in life, but their honest equal in death. From the results we can see it was minor casualties to defeat that Yonezawa army, all perfectly fine, meaning that after this the Yonezawa will have very little left to resist a siege assault, which Tananao can now do, teaming up of course with Yoshiuji who's just landed, so even more powerful our attack's going to be as a result. The navy can also become more powerful, linking up with the ships that brought Yoshiuji over. Overall, the enemy's in massive trouble. A quick auto-resolve should finish off the survivors of the Yonezawa forces here. This isn't their last settlement, so they could in principle recruit more forces to attempt to continue this war, but at this point I think they're pretty much beaten. That's the last we're going to see of the Yonezawa. So I'll repair the damage I did to the castle there in preparation for moving on into other areas of Hokkaido. In the west, my more dangerous operation to attack Shikoku Island is starting to get pretty serious. I'm moving men over from Owaji and I've already got troops landed who can go towards our province. I would have to wait a couple of turns if I wanted to do a combined assault on Awa, but at the moment, I'm in blitzkrieg mode. The Sioux army just wants to really hit the Imperials while they're down. Unfortunately, this is one of their most powerful positions. They've got a massive stack inside Awa with these random Hiroshima troops backing them up. But if we can break them here, the Imperials will see that even their most powerful stronghold is going to fall inevitably, so that will surely set them up for their impending surrender. Now Tana now started moving west towards the next settlement controlled by the Matsue. I sent a shinobi out who I happened to bring over with the fleet to see if there were any defenders there. It looks like there aren't. So this means I am guaranteed to capture that province in the next turn. And at the moment, I only need 2 provinces to win the campaign. So if I can capture that one and something on the Imperial battlefront, we will win. And luckily for me, I noticed that the next Hiroshima province is almost unguarded, just a tiny half-dead stack out there and the garrison forces. So Takayuki moves up to begin the siege. I move up a bunch of reinforcements. I'm going to ignore that Iwakuni half-dead stack moving eastward because I don't think they can do anything to really disrupt my campaign at this point. So all of the forces just rush over. I'll recruit a few guys in the castle there to keep public order okay. So now the balance bar should be super far in our favour, and indeed it is, so I can auto-resolve that assault. So this castle will be taken, and that means we only need 1 settlement to win, and since next turn we're pretty much guaranteed to take that settlement with Tananao, all I have to do is survive 1 more end turn sequence without anything going wrong or without losing a province, and we should be absolutely set to win this campaign with Tananao scheduled to deal the final blow. I have to destroy here the officers spreading Imperial sentiment, but at this point it doesn't really matter because the Imperial faction will be forced to surrender very soon. On one of our defensive fronts where the Satsuma are attacking Setsu here, I'm just going to play it safe, moving forces near the castle so the enemy don't have a chance of doing any real damage there. Now during the end turn sequence, the Okayama come to attack my force assaulting Awa. I fall back and the enemy pursue, meaning the Hiroshima reinforcements can't help them, and I'm going to get naval support fire. So the enemy's army here is actually pretty good. It even has an advantage on the balance bar, and we don't have a general, which we've seen before causes a lot of problems for the morale of our troops. But this one difficult looking fight will, as I said, completely break the back of the Imperial forces, destroying their spirit as they see that even their relatively defensible island positions can be taken by inferior Sioux forces. So let's do this. I form up using the small amount of hill I have available to me in my deployment zone, with line infantry in front, sharpshooters and melee guys behind. Immediately the artillery will start their bombardment. I'm also sending stormtroopers to defend the forested area on my right flank because they're especially good at close range. So we'll start off, as I said, by bombarding the enemy. As usual, the enemy have artillery themselves, so we'll be able to fire back, but it'll be far weaker, and we'll be using shrapnel shot to fire into these multiple enemy lines here, which have lots of very heavy units like these samurai who are very vital to cut down whilst they're still as far away as possible. So the enemy take a lot of losses to start with, and now we'll have to walk across the battlefield, taking more as they go. Their artillery targeted exclusively 1 unit on the edge of my line, which is actually quite good because it means missing shots are less likely to hit other units. This one here is the target. It's taken a couple of losses so far to the fire, and over time it is going to get a few direct hits inflicted upon it by the enemy's howitzers, but it's not too bad. Now the enemy are doing a cavalry attack on both flanks, sending 1 unit quickly here on my left and 1 unit slowly, a curious decision which actually proves to be quite good. Meanwhile on my left, they're advancing both quickly, coming through those forests towards the edge of my line. You can see another direct artillery hit there. It's starting to tear my unit apart there, but they're still surviving. They'll be okay, and we'll just keep their discipline, keep their line intact whilst the enemy advance. I used my own cavalry to attack the enemy's cav, and that engagement was about equal, so I decided to send these Yarikachi to go and support, and that's going to prove to be a quite poor decision, as we'll see in a moment. Meanwhile on the other flank, I was worried that my stormtroopers might get surprised by the enemy's cavalry, who will be able to come over the hills right in front of them. You can see they're already really close to my line, but there's no line of sight between me and the gunmen, so they'll be able to come out suddenly and possibly make a decisive strike. And speaking of decisive strikes, the enemy's slower cavalry unit from my left flank now rushes in, exploiting the fact that my spear units who were behind the line, weren't there anymore because they've moved over to fight the enemy's other cavalry. So they get a really good charge on the unit that's already been softened up by the artillery. That unit's in massive trouble. They take at least half of their regiment as casualties in a few seconds there once the cavalry impact. On the other side, the enemy's 2 cavalry have now come into sight, but I've got these spearmen. I'm going to spread out in an attempt to catch both of them into melee, and I successfully do that, meaning these guys have been locked down, and I can now go about taking them out, and I'm bringing over some of my own cavalry to help out. We should be able to beat off that advance there, so I'm not worried about that. The situation is more worrying here on my left, but my Yarikachi have come back to drive the enemy's cav away. The survivors from the infantry regiment are reforming, ready to start the actual battle, which is happening now in the centre. The enemy using archers and gunmen to attempt to distract me as they charge their high number of heavy samurai units right at me. For the most part, they're actually not succeeding. You can see samurai starting to turn back there in the centre, cavalry as well, rushing away. The enemy's line infantry, though, is better than mine. They're pretty good, so there's a good chance of them inflicting serious damage on us in a prolonged battle. So hopefully I can take out the melee infantry fast and then really concentrate fire on their missile infantry who have fewer numbers than me. On the left, we stop another samurai attack using the Yarikachi, stopping them from getting anywhere near my already damaged units. The rest of the army is pretty safe from melee attack. The enemy have kept their distance and are just gunning us down. Most of their melee troops are already gone. I move my stormtroopers up to flank the enemy's missile position, but a few survivors from the general's regiment charged in. A pretty dangerous charge, but they actually rout as they come into battle, and my stormtroopers are a hardy lot. The majority of them survive, so they're now able to form up and fire right into the flanks of the enemy's firing lines. My own lines are taking damage, as you can see, more and more bodies forming as my lines just struggle against gunmen who are just as good if not better than they, but now these stormtroopers on the edge should really turn the tide. The enemy rotate one of their units to face off against the stormtroopers, so they want to battle. It's rifle attendants versus stormtroopers. The enemy are better at range, but at this close range, my guys are able to gun the enemy down. You can see on the tooltip there, their numbers drop very rapidly. They lose half their men in a few seconds. They're not going to hang around long as those stormtroopers destroy them. Meanwhile, my cavalry have defeated the enemy's artillery at this point and are now behind the enemy's army, a crucial point for making strikes against their remaining units who are all facing forwards. At this point, there's not much left for the enemy to do. They start to rout. They have a few guys still in combat, including these landing force, a decent unit that seems to have gone undamaged on the flank. Their units, as they fall back, take a naval bombardment and fire it in the general area of the enemy's retreat paths just to kill more of them as they go, making sure that none of them will come back, and it seems to trigger a chain rout of their remaining forces. This is a decisive victory for this leaderless Tsu army. We did take a lot of losses in the main line, but suddenly nothing compared to the enemy. Overall, that was a fine engagement. It could have gone much worse. I guess our good terrain counted for a lot there. The guy on the left flank, of course, took a lot of damage, but by distracting the enemy's artillery and cavalry, the rest of the army could do their job very well. So, that was the last major engagement of the war, and it was a Tsu victory, indicative of the entire course of the war. Let's have a quick look at the results. You can see we took a few hundred casualties, nothing too major because the enemy lost thousands. A pure victory that will now allow us to go on in the next turn to capture another region on Hokkaido using Tananao, this of course being the final region. Balance bar super far in our favour, an absolute one-sided engagement for the very last fight of this war. A quick auto-resolve will deal with these Matsume forces. So with that, Tananao is the final general to strike against the enemy and win us a victory, which of course wins us the campaign.
Victory is reserved for those who are willing to pay its price. We have paid that price, and now we reap the rewards. We stand proud, the rulers of all Japan. All hail our mighty leader!
So victory is finally ours. We now control enough territory that our enemies are forced to surrender, which is essentially what the victory condition represents. The message confirms here, Campaign 1, Republic of Tsu. It is finally over for our many brave soldiers and the people of Japan who've been through quite a lot to get to this point. We can have a little look at the statistics of the campaign. If you're in HD, you'll probably be able to see them a little bit, but some highlight ones are that it took 140 turns to complete the campaign, a relatively long time, putting us somewhere in the late game. I just about started to research the super high-end tech, so the game was intended to go on slightly longer, so a pretty average performance in terms of time. We fought about 250 battles, and about 111 of those battles were shown in this series, quite a large number looking back at it. We destroyed nearly 2,300 enemy units, which represents about 275,000 enemy casualties. A huge cost for the enemies of Su to be fighting this war. We ourselves, we can't really estimate the losses because it doesn't show losses where a regiment is depleted and then regenerated. I'd estimate we lost at least 20,000 men, perhaps more, fighting on our side. We didn't lose any generals though, so that's good news. We did lose a lot of ships. We sunk about 28 enemy ships and lost about 17. So that's not so bad, still a sort of decisive victory-ish result, but overall the limited naval engagements wasn't where we won the war. In terms of finance, we made a load of money, 2.2 million koku over the course of the campaign, about 500,000 coming from trade, only 40,000 from raiding. I thought that would be more. And our highest income was 44.2k per turn, a very high turnly income, I guess considering we controlled a very highly developed Japan right at the end. It's not too much of a surprise. So finally the campaign is won, Japan is unified, the question now turns to her future. The nation is ours. The words spoken in the dreams of my grandfather and every generation before him for a millennia are finally said aloud. We all had our motivations in this war, and it is safe to say that most of you are not here to further the Republican dream as my people in Iga originally intended it. But that is exactly as it should be. This is not the Republic of Iga. This is not even the Republic of Su anymore. This is the Republic of Japan. Each man here represents a people who for the longest time have been of their own mind, living a life where the toils or joys of other provinces are merely stories kept as hazy companions by travellers. This world we have built is something that 5 years prior would have seemed absurd. If you told yourself 5 years ago that now you could traverse all of Honshu in less than a day, would you believe it? If you told yourself that you could send a message from Nagasaki to Izo in minutes, would you believe it? And if you told yourself that every man could have his say on how his nation is governed, would you believe it? Truly, we have all entered the dreams of my ancestors. So now, we are a unified nation, a nation that stakes out the world stage for its own, and sees a future in which even further marvels will pull us into an even more indulgent dream than we think is possible. Power. Power is what we have in abundance. Power is what I have in abundance. But this power is not mine. It is Japan's. This is the end of the last feudal family, the Todo, my clan that has spiked the waters of our republic just long enough to kill off the parasites within, and now must be drawn out as if it were never there. It is time for the Kokai, the true pool of heaven's will, to begin its rule. It has been an unspeakable honour to have led so fine a people to war to so fine an end. The loss shall never be forgotten, so long as the people of Japan remember where their republic was born. Remember the revolution that started a new chapter in world history. Remember the time they awoke from a dream, only to find it had become reality. Long live the Republic. Forces of the United Japanese Republic have launched attacks throughout Asia and the South Pacific, giving no warning or formal declarations of war to the Chinese Republic, United States of America, or French Empire, against all of which the sudden advance has been made. Officials from the affected nations have not agreed to the Republic's reiterated demands that sanctions on their growth must be lifted by the international community. The Prime Minister is set to make a statement later this evening in solidarity with our wartime allies and is expected to offer full support in military expeditions to the region. The attacks come as the Japanese Republic celebrates the birthday of its founder, Todo Takayuki, the man whose death through an alleged assassination by the United States Secret Service sparked a wave of nationalism that swept the ruling military elite to power 7 years ago. Casualties in the attacks are reported to be in the thousands, with tens of thousands of tons of aircraft and shipping destroyed and nearly 100,000 citizens displaced.